The rain hammered against the windscreen as I sat in the car park of the Dorchester Hotel, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. Sophie squeezed my shoulder from the passenger seat, her engagement ring catching the light from the street lamps. 28 years of my life had led to this moment, sitting outside my sister Charlotte's wedding venue, uninvited but determined to walk through those doors. Growing up in our terraced house in Birmingham, Charlotte was always the golden child. 5 years older, she excelled at everything whilst I struggled with dyslexia and social anxiety. Our parents, both teachers at the local comprehensive, couldn't understand why their younger daughter couldn't match Charlotte's academic brilliance. But it was Charlotte's words on my 18th birthday that carved the deepest wound. We'd been arguing about my decision to drop out of sixth form to pursue fashion design when she laughed. That cruel, dismissive laugh I knew too well. Fashion? You can barely dress yourself properly, Emma. You'll never make it. Stop embarrassing yourself and the family. Those words echoed through every rejection letter, every failed interview, every night I cried myself to sleep in my cramped bedsit in East London. But they also fueled something else, a burning determination that Charlotte had unknowingly ignited. I threw myself into my work, spending 18-hour days sketching, sewing, learning everything I could about the fashion industry. I took unpaid internships, worked 3 jobs to pay rent, and slowly, painfully, began building my portfolio. The breakthrough came 2 years ago at London Fashion Week. I'd managed to secure a tiny spot in the Emerging Designers Showcase, funded by maxing out credit cards and borrowing from anyone who'd listen. My collection, inspired by working-class British women's resilience, caught the eye of Vivienne Chen, creative director at Maison Laurent. Within 6 months, I was heading their Young Designers program in Paris. Within a year, my own label was being stocked in Selfridges and Harvey Nichols, but success meant nothing without someone to share it with. I met Sophie at an industry party in Shoreditch. She was a financial journalist covering luxury brands, sharp, funny, and completely unimpressed by the fashion world's pretensions. Our first date lasted 14 hours, wandering through London, talking about everything from Brexit to our favorite films. She proposed to me 6 months ago on Primrose Hill, the whole of London spread beneath us like a promise. Charlotte didn't know about any of this. After that birthday confrontation, we'd barely spoken. Family Christmases became awkward affairs where we'd sit at opposite ends of the table, communicating through our mother like children. She'd moved to Oxford, married a banker named James, and built her perfect life whilst I disappeared into my struggles and eventual success. Our parents, caught in the middle, had learned not to mention one sister to the other. I found out about the wedding through our cousin Lucy's Instagram. Charlotte in her engagement photo shoot, all pearl necklaces and countryside elegance. The wedding was to be a grand affair at the Dorchester, 300 guests, no expense spared. My invitation never came. When Mum tentatively mentioned it during one of our phone calls, her voice careful and apologetic, I pretended not to care. But that night, I made a decision. I would go to that wedding, not to cause a scene, but to show Charlotte and everyone else exactly who I'd become. Sophie initially thought I was mad. We were lying in bed in our Notting Hill flat, the one with the exposed brick walls and the view of the communal garden, when I told her my plan. "You want to crash your sister's wedding?" she'd asked, propping herself up on one elbow. "That's either the bravest or stupidest thing you've ever suggested." But she understood the weight of those words Charlotte had thrown at me, how they'd shaped everything that came after. "If you're going," she said finally, "I'm going with you. Partners in crime, remember?" We spent weeks preparing. I designed and made my own dress, a midnight blue silk creation that was understated but undeniably expensive looking. Sophie wore a tailored suit that made her look like she'd stepped out of a magazine. We practiced what we'd say, how we'd handle the inevitable confrontation. I contacted Lucy, swearing her to secrecy, and got the details of the reception. We wouldn't attend the ceremony, that felt too intrusive, but we'd make our entrance at the evening party when Charlotte would be surrounded by everyone who'd watched her dismiss me all those years ago. The morning of the wedding, I woke up with a panic attack, the familiar tightness in my chest, the feeling that I couldn't breathe. Sophie held me through it, reminding me of my breathing exercises, whispering that we didn't have to do this. But as the panic subsided, I knew I had to. This wasn't about revenge or causing drama. This was about closure, about looking Charlotte in the eye as an equal, maybe even as someone who'd exceeded her narrow expectations. We spent the afternoon in Covent Garden, trying to distract ourselves. Sophie bought me flowers from the market, white roses that reminded me of the ones Charlotte used to grow in our parents' garden. We had lunch at our favorite Italian restaurant, though neither of us could eat much. I kept checking my phone, watching Lucy's Instagram stories of the ceremony. Charlotte looked beautiful, of course she did, in a dress that probably cost more than I used to make in a year. As evening approached, we made our way to the Dorchester. The rain had started, turning London into a blur of lights and reflections. In the car park, I had another moment of doubt. What if security turned us away? What if Charlotte had me thrown out? What if this just proved I was still the embarrassing little sister, trying too hard to belong? Sophie took my face in her hands, her eyes steady and sure. "You've already made it, Em. This is just about showing them. And whatever happens, we leave together, okay?" We walked through the hotel lobby like we belonged there, Sophie's confidence infectious. The ballroom was exactly as I'd imagined. All crystal chandeliers and white roses, Charlotte's perfect Pinterest wedding come to life. We slipped in during the speeches, finding a spot near the back. I spotted family members I hadn't seen in years, aunts and uncles who'd written me off along with Charlotte. My parents were at the top table, Mum in a lavender dress I'd helped her choose over FaceTime, though she didn't know I'd be here to see her wear it. Charlotte was radiant at the center of it all, laughing at James's best man's speech, her hand resting on her new husband's arm. For a moment, I saw us as children again, building blanket forts in the living room before competition and comparison poisoned everything. The speeches ended, the dancing began, and still we stood at the edges, gathering courage. It was Charlotte who saw me first. She was walking towards the bar when our eyes met across the dance floor. Time seemed to stop, the music fading to white noise. Her face went through a series of expressions, shock, confusion, and then something else, something I couldn't quite read. She started walking towards me, her wedding dress trailing behind her like foam on a wave. "Emma?" Her voice was exactly as I remembered, that particular tone of disbelief she reserved for me. "What are you doing here?" Before I could answer, her eyes fell on Sophie, on our interlinked hands, on the engagement ring I'd designed myself with diamonds sourced from Antwerp. I saw her take in my dress, my shoes, the subtle but expensive jewelry. I watched her reassess, recalculate, try to make sense of the sister standing before her. "Hello, Charlotte," I said, surprised by how steady my voice was. "This is Sophie, my fiancée. We were in London and thought we'd stop by to wish you well." The lie came easily, smoothly, as if I'd been practicing it my whole life. Sophie stepped forward, all charm and grace, extending her hand. "Congratulations on your wedding. Emma's told me so much about you." Charlotte took Sophie's hand automatically, but her eyes never left mine. "Fiancé?" she repeated, and I could see her struggling to process this information. "But when did you—" She trailed off, possibly remembering we hadn't spoken properly in years, that she had no right to this information. 2 years ago, I said simply. "We're getting married next spring. Small ceremony in the Cotswolds. You know me, never been one for big crowds." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Charlotte's wedding had 300 guests, whilst mine would have 30, but we both knew which one would be featured in Tatler's society pages. Our parents had noticed the commotion and were making their way over. Mum's face when she saw me was a painting of emotions. Dad just looked tired, older than I remembered. "Emma, darling, we didn't know you were coming," Mum said, pulling me into a hug that smelled of her familiar perfume. "And you must be Sophie. Emma's mentioned you." She hadn't. We both knew that. But Mum was always good at smoothing over awkwardness. The reunion was playing out in public. Charlotte's perfect wedding, suddenly a stage for our family drama. I could see guests whispering, trying to work out who I was, why the bride looked so shaken. James appeared at Charlotte's side, all public school confidence and confused politeness. "You must be Emma," he said, shaking my hand. "Charlotte's told me about you." I wondered what version of me Charlotte had presented to her husband, the disappointing dropout, or the estranged sister who'd vanished into London's chaos. "We should probably go," I said after a few minutes of stilted conversation. "We don't want to intrude on your special day." But Charlotte grabbed my arm as I turned to leave, her grip tight enough to wrinkle the silk of my dress. Wait, she said, and for the first time since we were children, I saw uncertainty in her eyes. Can we talk? Properly? She led me to a quiet corner of the ballroom, away from the music and the guests. Sophie stayed with our parents, charming them with stories about our life in London. Charlotte and I stood facing each other, two women who'd once shared everything and now shared nothing but DNA and difficult memories. You look different, she said finally. Successful. I am successful, I replied, not bothering to soften it. My last collection sold out in 3 days. I'm opening a flagship store in Mayfair next month. Turns out I could make it after all. The words hung between us, her cruel prediction from a decade ago finally addressed. Charlotte flinched, but didn't look away. I was young, she said quietly. Scared, probably. You were so brave, dropping out, following your dreams. I was jealous, I think. I've always done what was expected. University, corporate job, suitable husband. You just didn't care what anyone thought. I cared what you thought, I said, and my voice cracked slightly. You were my big sister. Your opinion mattered more than anyone's. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears, threatening her carefully applied makeup. I'm sorry, Emma. I'm so sorry. I was horrible to you. I've regretted those words every day since. I wanted to stay angry, to hold on to the hurt that had fueled me for so long. But standing there, watching Charlotte cry in her wedding dress, I realized something. Her cruelty had shaped me, yes, but I'd shaped myself more. Every late night, every rejection overcome, every success earned, those were mine. Charlotte's words had been the spark, but I'd built the fire. I forgive you, I said, and meant it. But I can't forget. Too much has happened. We're different people now. Charlotte nodded, wiping her eyes carefully. I know, but maybe we could try? Start over? I'd like to know who you've become. I'd like to know Sophie properly. Before I could respond, there was a commotion from the main ballroom. We rushed back to find Sophie on the floor, my father kneeling beside her. She was conscious but pale, clutching her chest. Can't breathe, she gasped, and I recognized the panic attack immediately. But this was different, worse than any I'd seen before. Someone called an ambulance whilst I held her, whispering the words she'd said to me so many times, reminding her to breathe, that she was safe. The paramedics arrived within minutes, though it felt like hours. They did their tests, asked their questions, and then one of them said words that changed everything. Has she been under stress lately? Any history of heart problems in the family? Sophie's father had died of a heart attack at 52. She was only 31, but the paramedic's face was serious. We need to take her in for tests. Charlotte stepped forward then, all business and efficiency. James's brother is a cardiologist at St. Thomas's. I'll call him now. She was already on her phone, wedding dress be damned, making arrangements. Emma will ride in the ambulance. Mum, Dad, follow in your car. I'll meet you there after I've sorted things here. You can't leave your own wedding. I protested, but Charlotte cut me off. Yes, I can. This is family. The word hung in the air between us, loaded with years of absence, but somehow still true. She squeezed my hand once, then turned to handle the crowd of concerned guests, whilst I climbed into the ambulance with Sophie. The hospital was a blur of white walls and worried waiting. Sophie was whisked away for tests, whilst I sat in the relatives' room, still in my midnight blue dress, probably looking like I'd escaped from a party, which I suppose I had. My parents arrived, then Charlotte, who'd changed into jeans and a jumper I recognized from years ago. James came too, still in his wedding suit, and I felt guilty for ruining their day. Don't, Charlotte said, reading my face. We've got a lifetime of dinners ahead. This is more important. She sat beside me, not touching but close enough that I could feel her presence. We didn't talk much, but the silence was different from before, less charged, more companionable. The doctor, James's brother as it turned out, finally emerged after what felt like days. She's stable, he said immediately, and I nearly collapsed with relief. It was a severe panic attack that triggered an arrhythmia. We'll keep her overnight for observation, but she should be fine. She's asking for you. Sophie looked small in the hospital bed, but her smile when she saw me was bright. Did I ruin the dramatic exit? She asked, and I laughed through my tears. Completely. Though Charlotte leaving her own wedding to come to the hospital was pretty dramatic too. Sophie's eyes widened, and I realized she'd been unconscious for that part. Charlotte appeared in the doorway then, carrying coffee and what looked like sandwiches from the good cafe down the street. "Thought you might be hungry," she said to Sophie, "and Emma never eats when she's stressed. Some things don't change." It was such a sisterly thing to know, to remember, that I started crying again. We spent the night in that hospital room, Charlotte, James, my parents, and me, taking turns sitting with Sophie. Somewhere around 3 a.m, Charlotte and I found ourselves in the hospital cafe, the only customers in the harsh fluorescent lighting. "This isn't how I imagined reconnecting," she said, stirring sugar into her tea. "How did you imagine it?" I asked, genuinely curious. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "I thought maybe you'd see my wedding announcement somewhere, get in touch, or I'd finally get brave enough to reach out, apologize properly. I didn't imagine you showing up at my wedding looking like you'd stepped off a runway with a gorgeous fiancée, basically showing me exactly how wrong I was about everything. I wanted to hurt you," I admitted, "the way you hurt me. I wanted you to see that I'd made it without you, despite you." Charlotte nodded, accepting this. "I deserve that, but I'm glad you came. I'm glad this happened. Not Sophie being ill, obviously, but us, talking. I've missed you, Emma. I've missed my sister. I've missed you too," I said, and it was true. Under all the anger and hurt, there had always been a Charlotte-shaped hole in my life. "But I don't know how to be your sister anymore. Too much has changed." "Then we learn," Charlotte said simply. "We start over. Properly this time. No competition, no judgment, just two sisters who've lived different lives finding their way back to each other." She reached across the table and took my hand. Her wedding ring caught the light, reminding me of the night we'd disrupted. "Besides," she added with a small smile, "Sophie's already promised to design my dress for your wedding." "She what?" I stared at Charlotte, who laughed. A real laugh, not the cruel one from my memories. "When you were getting coffee earlier, she said she's been sketching ideas. Apparently I'm a perfect candidate for your new bridal line." I shook my head, amazed at Sophie's ability to build bridges even from a hospital bed. When we got back to the room, Sophie was awake, chatting to my parents about our flat renovation plans. She looked better, color back in her cheeks. "The Charlotte dress will be spectacular," she said when she saw us. "I'm thinking vintage-inspired, but with modern structure. Very her." Charlotte actually blushed, and I realized my sister, my accomplished, confident sister, was nervous about being accepted by Sophie. The sun was rising by the time the doctor discharged Sophie with strict instructions for rest and follow-up appointments. Charlotte and James insisted on driving us home, their wedding night spent in a hospital waiting room and now playing taxi service. As we pulled up outside our building, Charlotte turned to me. "Next week, dinner? All 4 of us? Somewhere neutral? Start fresh?" I looked at Sophie, who nodded encouragingly. "Okay," I said, "but somewhere normal. No Michelin stars, no showing off. Just dinner." Charlotte smiled. "I know just the place. There's this little Italian in Hampstead. Reminds me of that place Dad used to take us for our birthdays." I remembered it too, the checked tablecloths, and the owner who knew our names. As we watched them drive away, Sophie leaned against me, exhausted, but smiling. "So, did you get your closure?" she asked. I thought about Charlotte's tears, her apology, the way she'd dropped everything to help us. I thought about the years of hurt and anger I'd carried, and how light I felt without them. "I got something better," I said. "I got my sister back. Different than before, but maybe that's good. We're different people now." Sophie squeezed my hand. "Good different?" she asked. "Good different," I confirmed. Over the next few months, Charlotte and I slowly rebuilt our relationship. It wasn't easy. There were arguments, tears, moments when old wounds reopened. But there were also lunches where we laughed until we cried, shopping trips where Charlotte asked my advice, dinners where our partners bonded over their shared bewilderment at fashion industry drama. The real test came when it was time for my wedding. Charlotte was there for every fitting, every tasting, every minor crisis. When I had a meltdown about the flowers not matching my vision, she drove to 3 different suppliers until we found the perfect shade of cream roses. When Sophie's mother tried to hijack the guest list, Charlotte handled her with a diplomatic efficiency that left everyone happy. On my wedding day, as I stood in the cottage we'd rented in the Cotswolds, Charlotte helped me into my dress. It was my own design, of course. Simple but perfectly cut, the kind of dress I'd dreamed of making when I was 18, and she'd told me I'd never make it. "You look beautiful," she said, and then added quietly, "I was so wrong, Emma. About everything. You've made it in ways I never could have imagined." "We both made it," I said, looking at our reflections in the mirror. Two sisters, no longer in competition, no longer defined by our parents' comparisons or our own insecurities. Just differently. Charlotte hugged me carefully, mindful of the dress. "I love you, Em. I should have said it more when we were younger." "I love you too, Charlie," I said, using her childhood nickname for the first time in over a decade. She smiled through her tears, then immediately started fixing my makeup, bossy big sister to the end. Some things, the good things, never really change. The ceremony was perfect. 30 of our closest friends and family in a garden overlooking the rolling hills. Sophie looked magnificent in her suit, crying before I even reached the altar. Charlotte stood as my maid of honor, having insisted she didn't need a title, just the chance to stand beside me. When the registrar pronounced us married, Charlotte was the first to cheer, her dignity forgotten in pure joy for her little sister. At the reception, Charlotte gave a speech that no one expected. She spoke about sisters, about the ways we hurt each other and heal each other, about second chances and new beginnings. She told the story of a little girl who used to follow her big sister everywhere, and a big sister who was too scared of her own limitations to see her little sister's unlimited potential. She spoke about Sophie, how she'd brought out the best in me, how she'd been brave enough to crash a wedding for love. "Emma once told me she wanted to hurt me the way I hurt her," Charlotte said, her voice steady despite the tears. "But instead, she taught me something. Success isn't about being better than someone else. It's about being better than who you were yesterday." Emma's been doing that every day for years, whilst I stayed still, trapped by my own definitions of success. So here's to Emma and Sophie, who show us all that making it isn't about meeting someone else's expectations. It's about exceeding your own. Later, as Sophie and I danced to our first song, I saw Charlotte dancing with James, both of them laughing at something. My parents were at a table with Sophie's mother, all of them slightly drunk and sharing embarrassing stories about us as children. Lucy was documenting everything on Instagram, already planning her own wedding inspired by ours. "No regrets?" Sophie asked, pulling me closer. I thought about the journey that had brought us here, from that terrible 18th birthday to crashing Charlotte's wedding to this perfect moment. The hurt had shaped me, but love had saved me. Love for Sophie, love for my work, and eventually love for my sister again. "No regrets," I said, and meant it. "Though next time you have a panic attack, maybe not at my sister's wedding?" Sophie laughed, spinning me around. "Deal, though it did fast-track the reconciliation. I should charge for my services." As the evening wound down, Charlotte pulled me aside. "I have something for you," she said, handing me an envelope. Inside was a letter, dated on my 18th birthday, yellowed with age. I recognized Charlotte's handwriting, younger, less confident. "I wrote this that night," she said. "After our fight. I never sent it. I was too proud, too scared." I unfolded the letter carefully. It was an apology, raw and honest, admitting her jealousy, her fear that I was braver than her, that I'd succeed where she'd always played it safe. She'd written about how proud she was of my talent, how she'd seen my sketches and known I had something special. At the bottom, in shaky handwriting, she'd written, "You're going to make it, Em. I'm just too scared to watch you fly whilst I stay on the ground." "You've been carrying this for 10 years?" I asked, looking up at her. Charlotte nodded. "I almost sent it so many times, but the longer I left it, the harder it became. And then you were gone, and I thought I'd lost my chance." I folded the letter carefully, tucking it into my bouquet. "You never lost your chance," I said. "It just took us a while to find it." As Sophie and I left for our honeymoon, Charlotte hugged me tight. "Send postcards," she said. "Real ones, not just Instagram stories." I promised I would, and I did, sending her ridiculous tourist postcards from every stop on our Italian adventure. She sent back equally ridiculous ones from her work trips. And slowly, we built new memories over the old wounds. A year later, Charlotte called me crying. She was pregnant, terrified, excited, overwhelmed. "I need my sister," she said, and I was in Oxford within the hour. We spent the pregnancy together, shopping for baby clothes, arguing over names, sharing our fears about the future. When her daughter was born, she named her Emma Sophie, and I cried harder than I had at my own wedding. "She's going to be brilliant," Charlotte said, watching me hold my niece for the first time. "Whatever she wants to be, we'll support her. No comparisons, no competitions, just love." I looked at this tiny person, this blend of Charlotte and James, and saw possibility, potential, a chance to break the patterns that had nearly broken us. 3 years after that wedding crash, Sophie and I were back at the Dorchester, this time as invited guests for Charlotte's company's charity gala. I'd donated a dress for the auction, one of my signature pieces that had been worn by an actress at the BAFTAs. As we sat at our table, Charlotte in one of my designs, Sophie charming the corporate wives, I thought about how different this felt from that rainy night when we'd stood at the back, unwelcome and uncertain. "Mad to think we almost missed this," Charlotte said, reading my thoughts as she always could, even after years apart. "All of this, because of pride and fear and stupid words." I raised my glass to her. "To stupid words," I said, "and the courage to take them back." The auction began, and my dress went for an ridiculous amount to a woman who Charlotte whispered was married to a Premier League footballer. As the auctioneer moved on to the next item, Charlotte stood up. "Actually," she said loud enough for the room to hear, "I'd like to make an additional donation, £50,000 to the charity, in honor of my sister Emma, who taught me that making it isn't about meeting expectations, it's about exceeding them, especially your own." The room applauded, but I barely heard it. I was looking at Charlotte, my sister, my former enemy, my found-again friend. She winked at me, that same wink she used to give me when we were children playing pranks on our parents. Some things change, evolve, break, and heal. But sisters, real sisters, the ones you choose to be after the ones you're born to be, those are forever. Later that night, as Sophie and I lay in bed in our Notting Hill flat, she asked me the question she'd been holding back all evening. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Charlotte hadn't said those words? If she'd been supportive from the start?" I thought about it, really thought about it. Would I have worked as hard? Would I have pushed myself as far? Would I have met Sophie at that industry party, both of us hungry for success and recognition? "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe I'd have been successful anyway. Maybe not. But I wouldn't change it." "Even the pain?" Sophie asked, tracing patterns on my arm. "Even the pain," I confirmed, "because it led me to you, and eventually it led me back to Charlotte. Just took the long way around." Sophie kissed me then, soft and sure. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think you'd have made it anyway. You're too stubborn not to." I laughed, pulling her closer. "Stubborn? I prefer determined." "Stubborn," she insisted. "It's why I love you." As I fell asleep, I thought about that 18-year-old girl crying in her bedroom, her sister's words echoing in her ears. I wanted to tell her it would be okay, more than okay, that she'd build a life beyond her wildest dreams, find love that would sustain her through everything, and yes, even get her sister back. But she needed to walk that path herself, every painful, glorious step of it. The next morning, I woke to a text from Charlotte, a photo of little Emma Sophie, wearing a onesie I'd designed, with the caption, "She's going to make it, whatever it turns out to be." I smiled, saving the photo to the album I'd named Second Chances, because that's what we were, Charlotte and I, Sophie and me, all of us together. Second chances, hard-won and precious, proof that sometimes the longest roads lead to the best destinations. Looking back now, I realized that Charlotte's cruel words were actually a gift, not because they were true, but because they weren't. They forced me to prove something, not to her, but to myself, that I was capable of more than anyone imagined, including me. That success isn't inherited or granted. It's earned through tears and determination and getting up every time you fall. But the real gift was learning that success means nothing without people to share it with. Sophie, who saw me at my worst and loved me anyway. Charlotte, who had to lose me to find me again. My parents, who learned to love us both without comparison. Even James, who became the brother I never had. And little Emma Sophie, who would grow up knowing only that her aunt and mother adored each other. The fashion world continues to spin, collections come and go, trends rise and fall. But every piece I design carries something of that journey, from the girl who was told she'd never make it to the woman who made it on her own terms. And sometimes, when I'm fitting a wedding dress or designing a special piece, I think of Charlotte at her wedding, beautiful and untouchable, and me at mine, surrounded by love I'd earned and chosen. We never talk about that night at the Dorchester anymore, the wedding crash that changed everything. It's become family mythology, told differently by everyone who was there. But Charlotte and I know the truth. It wasn't about revenge or vindication. It was about two sisters finding their way back to each other across years of hurt and misunderstanding. It was about learning that making it isn't a destination. It's a journey, and the best journeys are the ones you share. Sometimes I dream about that alternative timeline, the one where Charlotte encouraged me from the start. But then I wake up to my real life, messy and complicated and absolutely perfect, and I'm grateful for every moment that brought me here, even the painful ones, especially the painful ones. Because they taught me that the only person who can truly tell you whether you'll make it or not is yourself. And I made it. We all did. In our own ways, in our own time. The story could end here, with success and reconciliation, a neat bow on a messy package. But life doesn't really end. It just keeps going, adding chapters we never expected. Like Charlotte calling me last month, voice shaking, to tell me James had been diagnosed with cancer. Or Sophie and I navigating the complex world of adoption, trying to add to our family. Or my business facing challenges I never anticipated, Brexit complications and supply chain issues that test everything I've learned. But through it all, Charlotte and I face it together now. Not as the sisters we were, shaped by competition and comparison, but as the sisters we chose to become. When James had his surgery, I was there, holding Charlotte's hand in the waiting room. When our adoption fell through the first time, Charlotte was at our flat with wine and tissues before I even finished crying. When my biggest investor pulled out, Charlotte connected me with 3 others, better ones, who believed in my vision. This is what making it really means. Not the success, though that's nice. Not the vindication, though that felt good. But this, the life built after the words, the love found in the ruins of hurt, the family reformed from broken pieces. Charlotte was wrong when she said I'd never make it, but she was also right in a way she never intended. I didn't make it alone. I made it because her words pushed me to find my own strength. I made it because Sophie loved me through the struggle. I made it because eventually Charlotte and I found our way back to each other. And now, as I watch little Emma Sophie play in Charlotte's garden, wearing a dress I designed and shoes Sophie picked out, I see the future spreading out before us. She'll grow up knowing her aunts love her, support her, believe in her ability to make it, whatever that means for her. She'll never hear the words that almost broke us. She'll only know encouragement, possibility, and the fierce love of a family that learned the hard way that success is nothing without each other. The rain has started again, that particularly British drizzle that makes everything look like a watercolor painting. Charlotte comes to stand beside me at the window, coffee in hand, comfortable silence between us. "Remember that night?" she asks quietly. "The wedding?" I nod, not needing to specify which wedding, which night. "Best worst decision I ever made," I say, and she laughs. That real laugh I've grown to love again. "Thank you," she says suddenly, "for coming that night, for not giving up on us, even when I gave you every reason to." I turn to look at her, my sister, my friend, my former enemy, and current champion. "Thank you for being worth coming back for," I say, and mean it. Sophie calls us for lunch then, James helping despite his fatigue from treatment, my parents arriving with too much food and too many opinions. This is my life now, not perfect, but perfectly mine, made not from spite or anger, but from love and determination and the absolutely stubborn refusal to let anyone else define my worth. Charlotte was wrong. I did make it. But more importantly, we made it, all of us, together, apart, and back together again. And that's a success worth more than any fashion show, any boutique, any vindication. That's the real victory, the one that matters, the one that lasts.